But it's good to have you with us today. So we're going to crack on and start thinking about why, if we can have the next slide. Chronic pain and chronic illness is something which, well, particularly since COVID, I think is finally the language that we are more comfortable with using. It's a lot more people's experience. Long COVID has had a huge impact on a lot of people. So I just wanted us to pause and take a moment to think about our churches and our place in churches and our church communities. So churches as groups of people of faith on a journey together. And I thought I'd share my favorite Bible verse because this is the one that gets me out of bed in the morning. It's the one that makes me feel inspired when I'm having to do things that are hard work. It's the one that helps me to stay challenged to keep doing what can feel like difficult things in churches. But it's this verse from Matthew about when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick, you took care of me. And Jesus's disciples going, what? No, when? You've not been sick. And the reminder from Jesus, whenever you did it for any of my people, no matter how unimportant they seemed, you did it for me. So I think straight out of the gate, we are challenged that Christianity is an active thing in our church communities and what we do together in our primary gatherings on Sundays, but in all the other ways that we gather. It really matters. We're not just there to detach our faith from our bodies, and because our faith lives in all of this, it lives in our lives. So I wondered if we wanted to have a little think together about, have you got any verses that or any bits of the Bible that you think also help us think about this stuff? Feel free to unmute. You definitely don't need to know where. I never remember what book and verse things are. But let's just... The foot washing, the serving of people. And that was a very physical need, but it was a way that powerfully expressed God's love through caring for parts of the body and even unpleasant things that people, there's a reason they had servants to do that. And that's the model of what our ministry must be. Life in abundance. Well, we live in bodies which vary, and our experience in our bodies isn't always a comfortable one, but that God's abundant life is still offered as part of that experience. I really like the reminder to practice hospitality. In truth, I think sometimes our churches become a bit of a club with invisible rules. People are really anxious about coming to church for the first time. I imagine you experience that. And once you've been there a while, you can forget that it's a big deal to walk into something where there are expectations. And so our hospitality is one of the most powerful things we can do if we're thinking about enabling all. And it's an approach rather than an agenda. It's not a list of things. It's a way of meeting and welcoming individuals with individuals' experience. And there are things that we can do consistently and learn about, but how we as individuals encounter other individuals and practice hospitality is incredibly powerful. Oh, I've put John 10:10 in twice. It must be that important. Look at that. The first Christian church community living together, and they were doing that thing of sharing together. Those who got too much shared with those who didn't have enough. And that experience translates in all sorts of ways for us, and is echoed in how in Luke, that I always think of the song that goes with this reading, but give and it'll come back to you, good measure. There was something about that, which I thought might be a helpful way for us just to begin to do a little bit of a brainstorm together in terms of I'd be very surprised if any of us haven't experienced periods of illness. Now, this might be a moment. So from a very brief brainstorming session, we have come up with a pretty extensive and definitely not exhaustive list of really common symptoms that a good number of the population live with. And given that our church congregations tend to have an older demographic, there are likely to be a higher percentage or proportion of people living with some more than one of these symptoms in daily life, which is part of their experience of coming to church, because we don't get to switch these things on and off when we want to. So we're going to move on to our next slide and just begin to think about the things that we probably shouldn't do. Now, there's no rocket science involved here, as you'll see, but I know that together it might be helpful to think through what we definitely shouldn't be doing, but perhaps do without thinking. So the first one on our list here is don't expect everybody to be able to do what seems to you a really simple task. That can manifest in all sorts of different ways. So straightforward things like, oh yes, just go over there and ask so-and-so, might be to someone who has used up 80% of their energy to get to the building in the first place. It might just be what makes it too much. So being aware when we either delegate or suggest things to people that we find easy, that may not be the case for everybody. So what are the implications of that, I wonder?
They might not come back to church again.
Yeah. Those of us that are really comfortable in our church communities through familiarity might feel like we can say, I can't do that. But in my experience, that's not really what we do. We like to try and meet other people's expectations. So we can set ourselves an extremely high bar and accidentally set that bar pretty high for others. So when we say come as you are, we have to really own that and mean it. And we're usually trying to get more done than we can. So we delegate potentially and we draw people into our community lives, which is great, but people have different gifts and different limitations. Now, this isn't rocket science, as I've said, but it is something that we need to be aware of and build everything about our community life around, because it will mean that some people are being asked to do things that don't come naturally to them, or that they're going to find too difficult to do more than once because you've asked them to, and they're going to half kill themselves doing it, and then they probably will stay out of your way after that. But it also means that people that we might have made assumptions about aren't actually invited to do things. So those of us who are part of communities, and if you're coming to something like this, I'm going to presume that you are people who are involved in various things. It's really important for us to look around and pause before we decide who we're going to ask people to be involved with, or who we want just to, could you just nip and do that, or would you mind copying that, or could you just carry this over there? Just pause and think about who might be able to do things with us. Dismissing people's experience because their condition is invisible. This is huge, isn't it, at the moment? I think there are an awful lot of hidden chronic illnesses. There's an awful lot of hidden chronic pain. I mean, you can't see mine right now, and I I'm looking around, I can't see yours either, if you're living with any. We tend to show the faces that are going to be the most conforming, usually, don't we? And I don't know how it is with or for whom now we're all doing a one-way system around the church. You can't do the shortcut anymore.
I do.
Yeah. How much do we do? But sometimes if you have an invisible condition or struggle, then sometimes if you mention it, quite a lot of, well, the responses can be mixed, can't they? And sometimes you can get a bit of, oh, well, we're all a bit tired, or oh no, my back's really bad, and so sometimes it's an invitation to an open conversation and a bit of sharing, but other times it can add to the expectation that people really just need to hide limitations, if you please.
Okay.
The one at the bottom of the list and the don'ts is force people to move around more than necessary. Well, this is an interesting one because just a quick sweep, I'm going to presume that most of you are part of Anglican churches and therefore going and having Holy Communion is part of church. And that's way more straightforward for some than others. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever done it, but I vividly remember the first time I forced myself to say, "Can I receive it here, please?"
I've done that, yeah.
um, it's not an easy thing to do, is it? People don't mind. I mean, I'm a vicar and I like to be able to do that, but there's something about church culture that makes us want to follow what everybody's doing. Now, some of that is a really healthy anthropological, we are creatures who share and we like to flock together, and actually shared movement is an important part of how we embody our faith. So what does that mean for people who can't manage the steps? If you, for example, make it okay for other people to do what is going to be most comfortable for them. Now, it might not surprise you that just because the vicar says you can stay there doesn't really make it very easy. And so the first time I ever did that and stayed where I wasn't the vicar. I was at vicar school as a future vicar's wife, in fact. So there was a different sort of expectation, or I thought there was. Um, the reason I'm talking about that experience is because the way that the priest who was bringing communion that day responded to me was pretty life-changing, and I'm going to share it with you. Because after the service, she came over and had a chat with me and said, "I just wanted to thank you for asking the communion to be brought to you." And I was mortified because I was still learning to adapt to my body. I hadn't yet become a wheelchair user. That was next month. Instead, I was just living in hell and dragging myself out and trying not to be a bother, which I think many people will relate to. But she said, "I want to thank you because it's really important ministry to be the one that can model and make it okay for people who are too nervous to do the same."
Okay.
I'm going to say that again in another way by giving you another little tiny experience of my own. So for my own ordination, utterly terrified because I don't think they'd ever ordained someone in a wheelchair or anybody who needed to do the whole sitting down rather than all the up, down, standing around, kneeling ordination bit. And we were sat right at the front with my husband, and the first hymn and the procession comes. And I sit there knowing that I had already decided I don't stand anymore because it's not possible or not kind. And my husband stayed sitting down with 998 people behind us and all the way, and he's very able-bodied. And he stayed sitting down with me in front of everybody else. And I mean, it probably says more about my marriage than anything else, but the most romantic moment ever. It was so, if I'd have been on my own, it would have been an incredibly lonely experience. Having somebody who just, without mentioning anything, just stayed sitting down absolutely transformed that moment. So when we think about the don't force people to move around more than necessary, well, we don't explicitly force anyone, do we? But we kind of do in the way that we work in church, the way things are done. So we need to make it really, really explicit and model that it's all right not to do it that way. Because for some people, they can't, and they never will be able to. There are plenty of people for whom that would never have worked in the first place. So actually, it's part of our ministry to look around, or perhaps as you embody your own chronic pain or chronic illness or neurodiversity or whatever it is that makes you you, that can enable others to know that they really can come as they are and stay where they're put, stay where they've chosen to sit, and to be an advocate for that. So you wouldn't come up with that on an access audit, but I've just given you two really simple examples that both of those people have forgotten about, that really changed things for me and how I saw church and how I consider my own ministry when I minister anywhere and feel like a pain in the neck. I look around and think, okay, who else is going to be wanting an ally here? Who else is it going to make it easier for if I just sit down and stay sitting down? This is the kind of stuff that we discussed. We spent a long time talking about seating, and it was a really insightful conversation. And from it, we have learned that seats without lumbar support keep people who need it away, and that is a significant problem. So being able to see what kind of chairs are in different places, which could be shared as easily as having a photograph on your website, is something that a lot of people will be trying to find out before they choose whether or not to come. But having a range of seating options is something which is incredibly helpful. One of the other things that we spent some time talking about was being brave enough to be the one who will model doing things not the same as everybody else. So sitting down or fidgeting at the back if you need to, or being the ones that enable others to feel like it's okay to be themselves sometimes requires a simple bit of modeling, but that it is a really, really important ministry in the ministry and life of the church. And so finding ways for us to just be attentive to the kind of experiences that might be in the room, but also your own and what would make a difference is really, really precious. We talked about having quiet corner, fidgeting corner space for people who might be more comfortable to just sit, and adult colouring, not just children's toys. So mindful activities that some people may really benefit from if they are dealing with anxiety or mental health challenges, or if you are someone who lives with neurodiversity of any age and needs to fidget in order to focus and process. Having a comfortable space that's clearly signposted and that people can go and be there for the worship is something that would cost very little indeed, and would just take a little bit of creativity, and something that would cost little or nothing for us to do.
May I ask a question? What would you call that space?
What an interesting, quiet corner maybe, although it's not quiet, is it? Because actually that's where we Mm, free space?
Yes, please.
Free space could be good, couldn't it?
Mm.
Right, in that case, so I think we need to type the words free space into quiet corner as an option of a name for that space, but make it explicitly as we start the services to be set up there for people to come as they are, made in the image of God, which we have, which brings us back to where we started, why this stuff really matters. There are things that we can change more easily than others. Things like blankets and cushions. This year, I was the first year where I've noticed that people seem happy to use blankets when they come to church. So we've got some nice crocheted blankets draped over the ends of our pews, because we've got a mixture of pews and chairs, and we've got a big basket full of cushions. So people say, "Oh, feel free to pick up a cushion or two. Feel free to grab a blanket." We've got a lovely old building that takes an awful lot of heating up. We do our best, but it's, we can do small things that can make a difference to being more comfortable.
Mm.
And how we embody the space is really, really important. And just saying, "Oh, come as you are, you're absolutely fine," needs embodying by everybody. So having these conversations in your PCCs, thinking through the experience of people in the room, and invite people to let you know what might make a difference. Because actually our bodies are never one thing. We all get ill. All of our bodies decline in age, in terms of functions, and it's okay. In fact, it's God ordained, isn't it? We live in these bodies. Our faith lives in these bodies, and it is really important that we are able to worship in changing bodies and lives, so that particularly at times where things are really tough, you don't lose your support, you don't lose your access to food for the soul and spiritual companionship and spaces for prayer that you've had access to, which become much more difficult to access. So thank you so much for joining us today.